The ship moved through the darkness of space like a silver needle. It was called the UNS, and it carried humanity's hope for peace. Inside, Ambassador stood by the observation window and watched the stars pass by. She was 53 years old, with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen many difficult negotiations. But this mission was different. This was humanity's first real chance to join the galactic community. The Dominion had ruled this part of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They were tall beings with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. Their empire included 17 different species, all serving under leadership. To them, humans were children, newcomers, a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 200 years ago, that had been building empires when humans were still living in caves. But humanity had something special. The Cascade Drive. Human engineers had created a new kind of engine that could cross vast distances faster than anything the Dominion possessed. They wanted this technology badly. And so, for the first time in their long history, they had invited a human diplomat to their capital world. Checked her reflection in the window. She wore a simple dark blue uniform with Earth's symbol on her shoulder. No jewelry, no decorations. She wanted to look professional, not threatening. Her advisors had warned her about pride. They did not like species who tried to appear important. Better to seem humble, better to let them feel superior. The ship arrived on a bright morning. The capital was a massive world covered in gleaming cities. Towers of crystal and metal rose toward the purple sky. Flying vehicles moved between buildings like insects around a hive. Had seen photographs, but the real thing took her breath away. 12,000 years of civilization had created something beautiful. An escort vessel guided them to the diplomatic landing zone. When stepped off the ship, she found a group of officials waiting. They towered over her, their 4 arms folded in what she had been told was a gesture of formal greeting. The leader stepped forward. He introduced himself as Minister Rand, voice of the High Synod. "Welcome to human," he said. His tone was polite but cold. "The Synod hopes your journey was comfortable." Bowed slightly. "Thank you, Minister. The Synod's hospitality honors Earth and all her people." She had practiced that phrase for weeks. The valued formal speech. They considered casual language to be disrespectful, planned to give them no reason to feel insulted. The first 3 days went well. Met with various Synod members and discussed the possibility of sharing the Cascade Drive technology. She asked for fair trade agreements in return. She requested that humanity be given observer status in the Dominion Council. Small steps, nothing threatening. She made sure to praise achievements and acknowledge their superior experience in galactic affairs. Some Synod members seemed interested. They asked intelligent questions about the Cascade Drive and what humanity might want in exchange. Answered honestly. Humans wanted peace. They wanted trade. They wanted to learn from older species and contribute what they could. She believed that different species working together could accomplish more than any single empire alone. But not everyone in the Synod was pleased. Archon Eth was the leader of the traditionalist faction. He was older than most, with dark blue skin that had faded to gray around his eyes. He had spent his long life believing one simple truth: they were meant to rule. Other species existed to serve them. That was the natural order. That was how things had always been. The idea of sharing power with humans disgusted him. These creatures had been banging rocks together while they were exploring distant stars. Now they expected to sit as equals at the Dominion table because they had built one clever engine. It was absurd. It was insulting. Eth watched during the negotiations. He saw how the other Synod members listened to her. He saw how some of them nodded at her ideas. This human woman with her soft voice and patient smile was slowly winning allies. If the talk succeeded, humans would gain influence. They would grow stronger. Eventually, they might challenge leadership itself. He could not allow that. On the 4th night, returned to her quarters feeling hopeful. The day's discussions had gone well. Several Synod members had privately told her they supported the trade agreement. If things continued like this, she might return to Earth with everything humanity had hoped for. She poured herself a glass of water from the container they had provided. It tasted slightly sweet, which she assumed was normal for their filtered water. She drank it while reviewing her notes for tomorrow's meeting. 20 minutes later, she felt dizzy. Her heart began to race. She tried to stand, but her legs would not support her. She fell to the floor, gasping for breath. The last thing she saw was the ceiling lights blurring above her. When the guards found her the next morning, Ambassador was dead. The official report was released within hours. According to medical experts, the human ambassador had suffered a fatal reaction to atmospheric elements. A tragic accident. Nothing could have been done. The Dominion expressed its sincere condolences to the people of Earth and offered to return the body with full diplomatic honors. Archon Eth stood in his private chambers and read the report with satisfaction. The poison had been perfect, undetectable. It mimicked natural organ failure in human bodies. No one would ever prove anything. He expected the humans to react with anger. Perhaps they would send an angry message. Perhaps they would threaten to end negotiations. But what could they really do? Their fleet was small. Their technology, aside from the Cascade drive, was unremarkable. They were alone in a galaxy that did not care about them. The Synod would offer apologies, maybe some trade goods as compensation. The humans would complain for a while and then accept reality. That was how these things worked. Smaller species learned their place eventually. But as days passed, something strange happened. Earth sent only one message. It acknowledged receipt of body. It thanked the Dominion for returning her. Then nothing. No demand, no accusations, no threats, just silence. Eth found this curious but not concerning. Clearly, the humans had understood their weakness. They had realized that challenging the Dominion was pointless. He had taught them an important lesson about their place in the galaxy. He could not have been more wrong. Far away, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, his body was laid to rest with full military honors. Her family wept. Her colleagues spoke of her dedication and courage. The President of Earth stood before the cameras and said nothing about revenge or justice. But in a secure room beneath the ceremony, admirals and intelligence directors gathered around a table. They looked at each other with cold eyes and began to plan. Humanity had sent with an open hand. The had answered with poison. Now they would learn what humanity did to those who murdered their own. 6 months passed after died. In that time, humanity said almost nothing to the Dominion. The Synod sent 3 formal messages expressing sympathy. Earth replied with short, polite acknowledgments. No accusations. No demands for investigation. The humans seemed to have accepted the official story about atmospheric complications. Some Synod members found this suspicious. Others, like Archon Eth, saw it as proof of human weakness. They know they cannot challenge us, Eth told his allies during a private meeting. Their silence is surrender. They have accepted their ambassador's death as the price of reaching above their station. The other traditionalists agreed. The crisis had passed. The Cascade drive remained beyond Dominion reach, but that was acceptable. Better to lose the technology than to share power with a species that had barely left its home planet. The natural order had been preserved. Life in the Dominion continued as normal. Trade ships moved between worlds. The Synod debated taxes and territorial disputes. The Festival of Eternal Rule approached, celebrating 12,000 years of civilization. No one paid much attention to the handful of humans who had begun appearing in Dominion space. They came as workers and traders. Some took jobs in shipping companies, handling cargo that moved between worlds. Others opened small businesses selling Earth goods, coffee, chocolate, music recordings. A few worked as translators, helping other species communicate with the occasional human merchant vessel. They were unremarkable, harmless, the kind of people that no one noticed twice. This was exactly what humanity wanted. On Earth, the plan was called Operation Long Memory. It was the largest intelligence operation in human history, and almost no one knew it existed. Only the President, the Joint Chiefs, and a small group of senior officers understood what was happening. Everyone else saw only the public face, a grieving nation slowly moving past its loss. The reality was different. Every human who entered Dominion space had been carefully selected. They were not soldiers. They were intelligence agents, trained in the old arts that humanity had practiced for thousands of years. Espionage, surveillance, infiltration. While aliens had been conquering stars, humans had been spying on each other. They had developed techniques that no galactic species had ever needed to create. The agents had simple missions: watch, listen, learn, report. Within 3 months, humanity knew the names of every Synod member who had voted on matters related to mission. Within 4 months, they had identified the specific committee that had approved her death. By the 5th month, they had financial records showing payments from Eth's faction to the poison supplier. They also learned something else. They were arrogant in ways that created weakness. Their security systems were designed to stop enemy fleets, not individual infiltrators. Their networks were built to share information quickly, not to keep secrets. They had ruled for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to be hunted. Commander Sarah was one of the agents. She worked as a cleaning technician in a government building on. Every day, she emptied trash containers and polished floors. Every night, she planted tiny listening devices in offices and data from unguarded terminals. No one looked at her twice. She was just another alien worker doing a job that considered beneath them. One evening, she found herself cleaning near Archon Eth's personal office. His guards barely glanced at her as she worked. Through the door, she could hear him speaking with an aide about the upcoming festival. "The humans remain quiet," the aide said. "Should we be concerned?" Eth laughed. "Concerned about what? A species that cannot even avenge its own ambassador. They are cowards. Their silence proves it." Sarah kept her face blank as she mopped the floor. Inside, she felt cold anger settle in her chest. She thought about who had traveled across the stars with nothing but hope and good intentions. She thought about the poison that had stopped her heart while she was reading notes for a meeting she would never attend. She finished her work and left the building. That night, she transmitted everything she had gathered to a secure relay station. The information would reach Earth within hours. Back on Earth, preparations were accelerating. Deep beneath the ice of Europa, humanity's most secret shipyard worked around the clock. Engineers had spent 5 years developing a new type of vessel. The Nemesis-class carrier was not the biggest ship humans had ever built. It was not the most heavily armed, but it had one feature that nothing else in the galaxy possessed. It was invisible. Not invisible to eyes, any ship could hide in the darkness of space. The Nemesis was invisible to sensors. It absorbed scanner waves instead of reflecting them. It masked its heat signature. It broadcast false signals that made it appear to be empty space. A Nemesis carrier could pass within kilometers of a warship and never be detected. Admiral Way stood on the bridge of the Nemesis 1 as it completed its final tests. She was 60 years old, a veteran of 3 colonial conflicts and the best tactical mind in the fleet. The President had personally asked her to lead this mission. "All systems functional," her executive officer reported. "The fleet is ready." Way nodded slowly. 12 carriers, 48 support vessels, 10,000 Marines trained in zero-gravity combat and covert operations. Everything humanity had spent 6 months building, all for one night. She looked at the holographic display showing Dominion space. Somewhere out there, Archon Eth was sleeping peacefully, confident that he had gotten away with murder. He believed humans were too weak to respond, too scared, too primitive. He was about to learn otherwise. "Begin final briefings," Wei ordered. "All personnel should understand the mission parameters. We strike during the Festival of Eternal Rule. That gives us 4 weeks." The crew moved to carry out her orders. Wei remained at the window, staring at the stars. She had met once, years ago, at a diplomatic reception. They had talked about hopes for peaceful contact with alien species, had believed that understanding between different peoples was possible. She had dedicated her life to that belief. They had killed her for it. Wei was not interested in understanding. She was interested in justice. The galaxy needed to learn that murdering human diplomats had consequences, not threats, not angry words, consequences. Her fleet would deliver that lesson personally. On, preparations for the festival continued. Decorations appeared in every city. Warships gathered in orbit for the traditional display of military power. Archon Eth commissioned a new robe for the celebration. He had never felt more secure. He did not notice the human cleaning technician who smiled at him in the hallway. He did not see the message she sent that evening, containing the complete schedule of festival events and the locations of every Synod member. The trap was almost ready. All that remained was to close it. The Festival of Eternal Rule began at sunset on. Millions filled the streets to celebrate their civilization's long history. Music echoed between crystal towers. Lights painted the purple sky in brilliant colors. In orbit, 300 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation, a reminder to the galaxy of Dominion power. Archon Eth stood on the balcony of his estate, watching the celebration unfold. He wore robes of deep crimson, the traditional color of his ancient family. Below him, his guests drank expensive wine and discussed politics. Everything was perfect. The festival was the highlight of the year, and this one was particularly special. The human threat had been eliminated. The old order remained secure. He raised his glass to the warships glittering in the night sky. 800 light-years away, Admiral Wei gave a simple order. Execute. The Nemesis fleet had been waiting at the edge of Dominion space for 3 days. 12 carriers and their support vessels hung in the darkness between stars, completely invisible to every sensor they possessed. Now they began to move. They crossed the border without detection. They passed patrol stations without triggering alarms. The Ghost Fleet slid through Dominion space like shadows through an empty house. Every officer and crew member understood the mission. Every Marine had memorized their target. There would be no mistakes. As the fleet approached, Commander transmitted the final signal. Across the planet, hundreds of small devices hidden in government networks activated simultaneously. They had been sleeping for months, planted by human agents in positions no one suspected. Now they woke up and began their work. On Eth's balcony, the lights flickered. He frowned and looked up. The warships in orbit were still visible, but something seemed different. Some of their running lights had dimmed. He was about to call for his aid when the lights flickered again. Then they went out entirely. Not just his estate. The entire city went dark, then the neighboring cities, then the orbital stations. Within 60 seconds, every electronic system on and in the space around it stopped functioning. Panic spread through the festival crowds. People stumbled in sudden darkness. Communication devices went silent. The warships in orbit, pride of the fleet, drifted helplessly as their systems crashed. 300 vessels designed to destroy enemies now could not even turn on their lights. Archon Eth pushed through his frightened guests, shouting for guards who could not hear him. His personal communicator was dead. The backup systems in his estate were dead. Everything was dead. He did not understand what was happening. Technology did not fail like this. Their systems had multiple backups, layers of protection, centuries of refinement. A total shutdown was supposed to be impossible. He did not know about the virus. Human programmers had spent 6 months creating it. The code was elegant and patient. It spread slowly through Dominion networks, hiding in routine data transfers, copying itself into backup systems. It never activated, never did anything suspicious. It simply waited for one specific signal. When that signal came, the virus struck everywhere at once. It did not destroy data or damage hardware. It simply turned everything off. A digital sleep that would last exactly 4 hours, long enough for the humans to do what they had come to do. The Nemesis fleet arrived, and while the planet was still blind, they passed the paralyzed warships without resistance. Defense platforms that should have filled space with deadly fire sat silent and cold. The Ghost Fleet took position around the planet and began descending toward carefully selected targets. Admiral Wei watched the operation from her command center. Holographic displays showed dozens of Marine teams moving through darkened cities. They used night vision equipment and moved with precise coordination. Their targets were not military bases or government buildings. Their targets were people. 15 members of the Senate had voted to approve assassination. Human intelligence had identified every one of them. The agents on had mapped their homes, their security systems, their personal habits. Now Marine teams moved through the darkness toward each target. Archon Eth heard the crash of his front door breaking. He tried to run, but strong hands grabbed him in the darkness. Something covered his face, and he breathed chemical sweetness. The last thing he heard was a human voice speaking calm, accented. Archon Eth, by authority of the United Nations of Earth, you are under arrest for the murder of Ambassador. Then there was only darkness. Across, 14 other Synod members experienced similar awakenings. Marines appeared from shadows, moving through estates that should have been impenetrable. Guards who could not see or communicate were easily avoided. Security systems that should have triggered alarms remained silent. By the time the systems began recovering, the operation was complete. Eth woke on a human ship. He was in a small cell with gray walls and bright lighting. His ceremonial robes were gone, replaced by simple prisoner clothing. Through a small window, he could see stars moving past. The ship was already in faster-than-light travel. A human officer stood outside his cell. She was young, with dark hair and cold eyes. "Where are you taking me?" Eth demanded. "This is an act of war. The Dominion will destroy your species for this outrage." The officer said nothing. She simply placed a small device against the window. A holographic image appeared, official diplomatic portrait, smiling, hopeful, dead. "You believed there would be no consequences," the officer said quietly. "You were wrong." She walked away, leaving Eth alone with the image of the woman he had murdered. The sun rose on a changed world. Power returned. Communications resumed. The warships in orbit slowly came back to life. But when they looked for their leaders, they found only empty homes and confused guards. 15 of the most powerful beings in the Dominion had vanished in a single night. No one had seen the attackers. No one had heard anything. They had simply disappeared, taken by ghosts. The Synod held an emergency session. Accusations flew in every direction. Some blamed internal enemies. Others suspected rival species within the Dominion. Only a few quiet voices suggested the truth, that humanity had reached into the heart of civilization and taken what they wanted. Most refused to believe it. Humans were too weak, too primitive. They could not possibly have done this. Then the broadcast arrived. Every screen on every Dominion world, on every ship and station in 17 star systems, displayed the same image. A human courtroom, 15 prisoners in simple clothes, and a message in every major language of the galaxy. The people of Earth announced that Archon Eth and 14 members of the Synod have been arrested for the murder of Ambassador. They will stand trial under galactic law. All proceedings will be broadcast publicly. Justice will be served. The message ended. The screens returned to normal. And across the Dominion, millions of beings realized that the galaxy had changed forever. Humanity had not come with fleets to burn cities. They had not demanded territory or surrender. They had done something far more frightening. They had proven that no one was beyond their reach. The station hung in neutral space, far from any empire's territory. Humanity had built it in secret over the past 3 years, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. Now it served its purpose, a courthouse for the galaxy to witness. Inside, the trial of Archon Eth and his co-conspirators began. Billions watched across hundreds of worlds. The broadcast reached every species in the Dominion and dozens beyond. Translator programs converted the proceedings into over 400 languages. For the first time in galactic history, murder would be tried not in secret councils or closed chambers, but in full view of everyone. The courtroom was simple: wooden benches, plain walls, a raised platform for the judges, 3 humans selected for their legal expertise and reputation for fairness. The defendants sat in rows, wearing the same simple clothing they had been given on the ships that brought them here. Archon Eth looked older than he had 6 months ago. The confidence had drained from his face. He sat with his 4 arms folded tight against his body, watching the proceedings with eyes that could not quite believe what was happening. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Doctor. She was 62 years old, with gray hair and a voice that filled the courtroom without ever rising to a shout. She had spent 40 years prosecuting war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now she would present the case against those who had killed. "Members of the court," she began, "we are here today to examine a simple question. Did these 15 beings conspire to murder a diplomatic envoy who came to them in peace? The evidence will show that they did." What followed was devastating. Human intelligence had gathered everything. Doctor presented communications between Eth and his allies discussing the need to stop human influence. She showed financial records proving payment to the specialist who had created the poison. She introduced testimony from officials who had grown disgusted with the conspiracy and chosen to cooperate with Earth. The poison itself was examined in detail. Human scientists explained how it had been designed to mimic natural organ failure. They showed how it had been placed in Ambassador's water supply. They demonstrated that the medical report had been deliberately. Eth tried to object. He claimed that humans had no authority to try citizens. He demanded to speak with the Dominion Synod. He insisted that this entire proceeding was illegal. The judges listened patiently. Then the chief judge, a woman named Justice Thornton, responded. "The defendant argues that this court lacks authority," she said. "We disagree. Ambassador was murdered while under diplomatic protection recognized by Galactic Convention. That convention grants the victim's government the right to seek justice. Earth is exercising that right." She looked directly at Eth. "You chose to kill our ambassador because you believed we were too weak to respond. You were mistaken. This trial will proceed." Day after day, the evidence continued. Witnesses described secret meetings where the assassination was planned. Experts analyzed the conspiracy structure. Former members of Eth's faction explained why they had decided to betray him, not for reward, but because they could no longer stomach what had been done. One witness was particularly powerful. His name was Counselor, and he had served Eth for 30 years before finally breaking with him. "I believed in the Archon's vision. I believed that supremacy was natural and right. But when he ordered the ambassador's death, something changed in me." Doctor asked him to explain. "Ambassador was not a threat," said quietly. "She was a bridge builder. She wanted cooperation, not conquest. Killing her served no purpose except to satisfy the Archon's pride. I realized then that I had been following a murderer, not a leader." Eth stared at his former counselor with pure hatred, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say. The trial lasted 14 days. When the evidence phase concluded, Doctor delivered her closing argument. The defendants believed they were untouchable, she said. They believed that their power protected them from consequences. They believed that humanity was too young, too weak, too insignificant to matter. She paused, looking at each defendant in turn. Ambassador traveled too with hope in her heart. She believed that different species could work together. She believed in the possibility of friendship between humans and she extended her hand in peace. Doctor's voice hardened. They answered with poison. They killed her alone in her quarters far from home, surrounded by those she had hoped would become allies. And then they lied about it. They called it an accident and expected the galaxy to believe them. She turned to face the broadcast cameras directly. Let the galaxy understand this. Humanity does not forget its dead. We do not abandon those who serve us. When someone murders one of our own, we do not rage blindly. We do not threaten. We gather evidence. We build cases. We find the guilty. And we bring them to justice, no matter how powerful they believe themselves to be. She looked back at Ev. You asked if we had the authority to try you. Here is your answer. You gave us that authority when you killed our ambassador. You made this trial inevitable the moment you decided that life was worth less than your pride. The courtroom was silent. 2 days later, the judges delivered their verdict. Guilty on all counts. All 15 defendants were convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and the murder of a diplomatic envoy. The sentence was not death. Humanity had ended capital punishment centuries ago. Instead, the defendants would spend the rest of their natural lives imprisoned on a station orbiting Earth's sun. They would have comfortable quarters, access to information, and one specific requirement. They would study human history. Justice Thornton explained the reasoning. The defendants believed they understood humanity. They were wrong. Their sentence requires them to learn about the species they underestimated. They will read our history. They will see how we have dealt with those who believed they could murder without consequence. Perhaps, in time, they will understand why this trial was inevitable. Eth stood in silence as guards led him away. The confident leader who had ordered an ambassador's death was gone. In his place was an old who had finally realized the truth. He had not been dealing with a weak species. He had been dealing with a patient one. A species that remembered everything and forgave nothing. A species that had spent thousands of years learning how to find the guilty and make them pay. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, billions of beings sat in silence, absorbing what they had witnessed. Humanity had not come with weapons of mass destruction. They had come with evidence and arguments and the steady, implacable machinery of justice. They had shown the galaxy exactly who they were. And the galaxy would never see them the same way again. 1 year after the trial, the galaxy had changed. The Dominion still existed, but it was not the same empire that had ruled for 12,000 years. Archon Eth's faction had collapsed completely. Without its leaders, the traditionalist movement fell apart. Younger, who had watched the trial broadcasts with growing horror, demanded reforms. They wanted accountability. They wanted justice. They wanted to be better than the leaders who had murdered a diplomat and lied about it. The new synod was led by different voices. Counselor, who had against his former master, became one of its most influential members. His first official act was to send a formal message to Earth. The Dominion acknowledges responsibility for the murder of Ambassador. We offer our sincere apology to her family, her colleagues, and all the people of Earth. We ask for the opportunity to begin again. The message was received in Geneva at the headquarters of the United Earth Government. President, no relation to Commander Sarah, who had returned quietly to civilian life, read it carefully before responding. Earth accepts your apology and welcomes the opportunity for renewed dialogue. We hope that our species can build the friendship that Ambassador believed was possible. New negotiations began. This time they proceeded differently. They treated human diplomats with genuine respect. They listened more than they spoke. They asked questions instead of making demands. Within 6 months, a preliminary trade agreement was signed. Within a year, humanity had observer status in the Dominion Council. The Cascade Drive technology was shared, but carefully. Humanity offered it as a gift to species that agreed to basic standards of diplomatic behavior. Those who respected envoys and honored treaties received the technology freely. Those who did not were simply excluded. But the changes extended far beyond space. Across the galaxy, species that had barely noticed humanity before now studied them with intense interest. The trial broadcasts had been watched everywhere. Diplomats and intelligence chiefs analyzed every detail, trying to understand what had happened and what it meant for their own societies. An admiral named Hen was asked by a subordinate why their empire was suddenly seeking alliance with Earth. The humans were not particularly strong, after all. Their fleet was modest. Their territory was small. Hen had been at his post for 60 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He understood power in ways that younger officers did not. The humans are dangerous in ways we have never encountered, he explained. Most species, when wronged, respond with anger. They send fleets. They make threats. They burn cities. Humans do something different. He pulled up recordings from the affair. The 6 months of silence, the invisible fleet, the surgical extraction, the public trial. When humans are wronged, they go quiet. They watch, they learn, they plan. And then one night you wake up and discover that everything you believed was secure has been taken from you. They do not rage, they calculate. They do not threaten, they execute. He looked at his subordinate with serious eyes. We seek alliance with Earth because we do not wish to discover what they might calculate if we became their enemies. I suggest you approach them with the same respect. Similar conversations happened across dozens of worlds. Species that had dismissed humanity as insignificant now saw them differently, not as the strongest or oldest civilization, but as something perhaps more concerning, a patient predator that never forgot and never stopped. Some found this frightening, others found it admirable, a few found it inspiring. On Earth, life returned to normal. The public had followed the trial with intense interest, but most people were happy to move on. They were proud of what their government had accomplished, but they did not want to dwell on death and revenge. They wanted to build the future that had dreamed of. In Geneva, a memorial wall listed the names of every human who had died in service to peace. His name was there, carved in stone that would last for centuries. Beneath her name, someone had added an unofficial inscription. The authorities discovered it one morning but chose not to remove it. The words read, "She extended her hand in friendship. They answered with poison. We answered with justice." Visitors to the memorial often stopped to read those words. Some cried. Some simply stood in silence, thinking about what they meant. Admiral Way visited the memorial once, several months after returning from the mission that had made her famous. She stood before his name for a long time, saying nothing. When a reporter recognized her and asked for a comment, she gave a simple reply. "We did what we had to do. Ambassador deserved justice. Now she has it." She walked away before more questions could be asked. Thousands of light years from Earth, Archon Eth sat in his prison cell and read human history. It was part of his sentence, but he had come to approach it with genuine interest. He had nothing else to do, after all. Nothing but read and think and slowly understand the species he had so badly misjudged. He read about human wars and human peace treaties. He read about crimes and punishments spanning thousands of years. He read about emperors who believed they were above justice and the ordinary people who eventually brought them down. One passage struck him particularly hard. It was from a human philosopher who had lived thousands of years ago. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Eth read those words again and again. He thought about dying alone in her quarters. He thought about the confident decision he had made to have her killed. He thought about the 6 months of silence that followed, silence he had interpreted as weakness. He understood now. The silence had not been weakness. It had been patience. The humans had known even then that justice would come. They had simply needed time to prepare. He put down the book and looked out his small window at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing. Species were learning new lessons about consequence and accountability. The old rules which had allowed the powerful to do as they pleased were being rewritten. And it had all started because humanity refused to let one murdered ambassador go unavenged. Eth did not know if he would live long enough to see how the changes unfolded. He was old, and prison life was not easy, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had been wrong about humans. Everyone had been wrong about humans. They were not weak or insignificant or primitive. They were something the galaxy had never encountered before, a species that combined patience with capability, that answered cruelty with justice rather than destruction, that played games measured in years instead of days. The galaxy was learning to respect them. Some would learn through friendship and alliance. Others would learn the way Eth had learned, through painful experience. But everyone would learn. That was the truth the humans had taught with their silence, their ghost fleet, and their patient trial. That was the message they had sent to every species watching the broadcasts. You can ignore us, you can underestimate us, you can even try to harm us. But we remember, and we always come for justice. In the end, that was enough.